Hello, Tungsten Miner here, and I am standing in a swamp that is just about halfway between my old house and my new house. And I am intending to build a bridge to get from one to the other. There in the distance, you can just barely make out that giant sequoia, which is at the very end of the arboretum, so you get a sense of how far away I am. In the meantime, though, I've been working my way down towards figuring out where exactly I want that bridge to be by making a road. Now, it just so happens that I went back to where the road is on that side of things, near the village, where it makes a right-hand turn to head over to my house, and figured out that it is exactly on negative 499 on the x-axis. So here I am standing on negative 499 on the x-axis, directly in a straight line to get back to that road. Because, of course, Minecraft being what it is, kind of blocky, kind of square, it's easiest to have roads that go straight and not roads that kind of turn at slightly oblique angles. So I want to be able to have that roadway come down from the hilltop and cross straight across on a nice straight bridge and wind up connecting with this road over here. So having done that, I've gone ahead and made this road. Now, what you can see is that this is not just regular dirt blocks, because of course they would have long since converted back to grass if I had made them out of regular dirt. What I've done instead is I've taken my chisel, thrown some dirt on here, and I've grabbed this reinforced dirt pattern, which basically looks just like dirt except for the slightly darker edge. And it is a tiled pattern, so it won't make the darker edge everywhere. It'll only make it where there's a discontinuity between one type of block and another. So when I make my roads, I use my excavator pretty extensively. So you can see I get a nice 3x3 road every time I break one of these things down. When I need to turn, I'll go on a diagonal. And I want to keep the road looking fairly contiguous and to have the same sort of shapes in it over and over again. So I'm always trying to make these little star shapes. You can kind of see if I dug those two blocks out there. Get that one, put that one back there. So you can see this sort of star shape. That's my unit on a diagonal road. And I'm trying to always create units like this one, where it's 3x3 in the center with these extra little spikes going off the edge, like a gear shape. So whenever I'm making a unit, whenever I'm making a piece of a road, I want to repeat that unit as much as I can, and then always wind up with that unit as I'm going along. The next thing I do as I'm making my roads doesn't really come up when it's a nice flat area here, but when I get more into the hills, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. And here's an example. When I first brought this road down from the hills here, this extended out a ways further. But I want on either side of my roads to have a 1 meter grass verge around. Again, just makes it look nice and makes it so that as you're coming along with whatever sort of transportation, be it horse or on foot or whatnot, you can always see the road clearly, you know, can stick on the road clearly. And so I flattened this out and just kind of carved it down so that everything fits very nicely. And the road surface is always surrounded on every side, except for above another piece of the road. So you never see something like this, for example, where there's a side of the road kind of sticking out. Heading back up into the hills a bit further, you can see in a case here, that block wasn't there originally. But looking at the overall elevation, I'm trying to make the road a road. I'm not trying to make it a big mound that sticks out or in some way doesn't flow smoothly with the terrain. And in this case, the easiest thing to do was to stick that block there to preserve that grassy verge along the side of the road, which was already pretty natural. So I decide when it's time to change elevations. So dig that out as an example. If I were coming along and looked at this and said, okay, what's the elevation of the road here at this next stage? I can say, well, there's nothing over there, which means I need the road to go down one more step. If there were a block over there, then I'd say, okay, I could put the road down and have it be completely covered on both sides. So I'm going to do that instead. As I go further up along my road here, nice and straight, those are always preferable, of course, it makes things easy. Here's a case where this little piece of the terrain poked out a bit further, and so I trimmed it back to give myself that nice smooth verge along the way. Of course, all along this space too, there were lots of trees, some of which overhung the roadway and made it so that you'd bump your head on the leaves, or at least they'd be kind of in the way. And I always knock those trees down, for which I have my lumber axe. And I'll take the saplings that come from that and just plant them a little bit further back off the side of the road, so that I keep generally the same number of trees in the area, and I keep them more or less in their same positions. I don't want to influence the terrain too much that I'm passing through, but I do manage to push them back a ways, so I'm not too worried about things overlapping the road. As I'm going along, I always want this verge to be at the same level as the road surface itself. So the road is actually 5 meters wide, 3 of the roadway itself, and then 1 meter of grass on either side. And I don't want I don't want cliffs right next to the road where I've had to dig out terrain. So any place where it jumps by more than 2 meters, I'll trim that back as well, so that I just get that 2 meters, 1 by 2 sort of slope. So in this case, I trimmed out a bunch of stuff here, leaving a 2 meter and in sometimes 3 meters. There was a stretch right in here that was 3 meters. And so I trimmed that back to make it so that it never has a slope of greater than 2 to 1. As I come along here, you can see another case where, obviously this used to extend out into the roadway a bit more. I've carved that back. Same thing here. Oh, here I missed a spot. So I don't need to trim back very far, but I want to keep it from looking like somebody's come through here with a bulldozer, and leave the terrain looking sort of natural-ish. Here's a case where things turned and things are changing in elevation. So I wanted to follow the terrain off in this direction because obviously it's starting to get really steep here. And somebody who's building a real road is not going to take the hard way and go up and over the hill. They're going to take the easy way and go around. So the transition from one to the other is I take my basic unit of straight road, which is just a 3x3, and change by just intersecting that with my basic unit, that star unit, of my diagonal road at the very tip. So at the edge of my first unit of diagonal road lines up with the edge of my last unit of straight road, and they kind of overlap, and I make the union of the two of them. So that leads to this as being the basic unit kind of down to here of a corner. And then I just repeat that unit, repeat that unit, repeat that unit as I go along, repeat that unit here. And in this case, I had to fill in a little bit of dirt on the side to get things to line up because I wanted to have that basic unit. And part of my basic unit for a diagonal roadway is to have this L-shaped pattern here. So in this case, that was already part of it. In this case, I want to have that L-shaped verge along the side. And it's just personal preference. There's no mechanical reason why you have to do it that way. So here's a spot. As I go along, I always find little pieces where things weren't quite right. And what I'm trying to do is make it feel like this roadway was always there, and somebody just came along and put the road down. But the hill itself fits as much as possible. I don't want to be making huge changes. Oh, speaking of huge changes, looks like I have a chunk limiting error. I will be right back. Well, that looks a lot better. Yeah, Minecraft. So realistic. Anyway, diagonal meets the straight road again, and you can kind of see here again is the end of one piece and the beginning of the next piece. So I'm using that same kind of basic unit to do the transition from diagonal to straight. Here's another case where I had to carve the hillside back a bit. And over here, I even had to take that like several layers back in order to get the roadway to not have this big cliff right next to it. In cases where I wind up going literally next to something that is a giant cliff, and even doing a 2-to-1 slope is going to wind up having me dig many, many meters back into the hill, I'll go get some cobblestone and build like a retaining wall so that there's some structural sense as to what's going on here. Also, doing the roads this way, you get kind of a nice view if you're picking the right places. Because like any other natural roadway, I do need to get up the hill, but I'm not going to make something that like stair steps its way straight uphill. So I did spend a little bit of time scouting this route before I decided on it. And when we get to the end, I'll fly back over the route and show you how I chose this particular place. So going along, here's a brief stretch. And again, I'm trying to follow the terrain, right? I started at the bridge area and said, what would be the way that you would walk up this hill if you were on horseback, or maybe we're hauling a wagon with on a horseback. So you can build a road that kind of makes sense as a road, makes sense as the place where that road goes. So again, the repetition of my basic unit. This one's a little bit foreshortened just because of the space, but still trying to achieve this same kind of sawtooth pattern here. There's an area up here where I did things not quite the same way, and I want to go back and fix it because I was experimenting and I just don't quite like how it turned out. Yep, here it is. So here's an example of doing it in a slightly different way, where you just kind of cut straight across, and I don't know, I don't like it as much. It looks a little awkward. So I'll come and fix that later. And as I'm traversing my road here, coming around the corner, you get a little bit of a hint of the house. And as you can see, I've been working a bit on the kind of grounds around the house as well. I've finished getting in the quartzite retaining wall. I have finished putting in a kind of just guide rail, really, a guardrail little fence on the top of all the quartzite retaining wall areas. And I've defined through this process a bunch of different lawns. And using the same rule about a 2-to-1 slope, I've cut back or added in mostly a lot of dirt to make up sort of a foundation for the house itself. So now, if I zoom back a bit, the house looks like it owns the top of this mountain, because to a large extent I've followed the contours that were there, but I've added just enough around the edges to make it clear that this has been sculpted and contoured. The hill has been adjusted a little bit in order to fit the needs of the house. So there's that nice interplay of a little bit of what was naturally there. This is a good example right here. A little bit of the natural terrain left beside a lot of the man-made terrain. As far as intentions for these various lawns, I haven't exactly decided yet, but sooner or later I will want to do some things with my nice trees and flowers and garden stuff in order to make some interesting lawns here. And to keep it in fitting with the idea of this as a fairly modern house, I'll be looking for ways to do that, make modern looking gardens rather than more antique looking gardens. Talk a bit about this fence here. The quartzite is just regular quartzite. The glass is white stained glass, so just regular glass with a bone meal in the center, gives you 8. And then this is just plain old black granite sawed into posts. And as I went around the house, I tried to make the sections kind of long and skinny, like you see the windows at the top here and the windows all across over there. So I tried to keep them either 5 or 6 meters between posts to give that same sense of scale, because that's the same width that a lot of these windows all are in the house, at least on that side and across the top there. Can't always manage that, because there are some places where you wind up with like a 4 just because of the way the numbers work out. But you don't really notice them so much because you can't see them straight on. You just get this impression of kind of a long, low fence as you're going along. I've also put in stairs. I don't remember if that was in the last video or not, so that you can get up and down to all the different levels of the grounds of the house. I've been working with DecoCraft just a little bit, starting to put in some ideas of what decorations a modern house might have. Jukebox maybe not entirely modern, but kind of cool. Yeah, so let's get back to talking about how this road was graded. So as we're looking at the house here, it became clear that this was going to be the entranceway, and I built the staircase, and that's obviously facing off in this direction. You might remember when I was first talking about things, I was thinking about the road going down here and then back over, but as I looked at it, this is pretty darn steep. You can see the gradation there. And that's just going to lead you to the beach. And in order to get around again to here, which is the point where I knew I wanted my bridge to be, I was going to have to make a lot of curves and follow a lot of the coastline through this lowland area, this swampy area, which is really not the best place for having a road, both because you need a lot of curves to do it, and because traditionally at least, a lot of these roads would be built on the hillsides because it's up and out of the kind of swampy, low, marshy areas down below, and it's got a clear kind of view. So I wanted to emulate that sort of pattern and stick to the ridgeline a little bit. Although you can see up here where it gets really tall and kind of jagged, that would obviously not be very easy to cross. So I was looking for a way to go from this point at the front door all the way down to this point where the bridge was going to come in, making as small a changes in gradient as possible along the way. Of course, realizing that I'm a lot higher up on my house, so I'm generally going to be heading in a downhill direction. Well, as you can see, going straight along stays in a pretty flat area, but then it drops off really quickly right here. So I knew I wanted to turn and follow this flat, kind of same altitude space here. And I noticed there's a hill here and a hill here, but in between, it stays about the same altitude. So I knew I wanted my road to cut between those two hills. Then there's this little grove of pine trees, pine, cedar, whatever the vanilla Minecraft tree is. Spruce. There's a grove of spruce trees here. So I knew I wanted to cut through that because it's scenic and flat. And then this rises up a little bit to come around the corner of this hill and then cuts along that hillside. And I knew I could dig back a bit into the hill without making things too dramatic because it's not that steep as to make cliffs out of things. But it's steep enough where this is actually a really nicely scenic road. And then here, this again starts getting steep and down quickly, and it's going to run me right into the water when what I want to do is wind up over here. So I knew I needed to come inland. So I just followed the slope and stayed as level as I could while still making progress in the right general direction. And then here, I just wanted to cover ground, and this is a nice gradual slope, fairly smooth, very easy. And then I wanted to get down to this point, and instead of making a hard corner as I've done with some of my other roads, I was really liking the effect of how having these diagonals works to make things feel a bit more round and a bit more smooth. And so I cut the same sort of diagonal track to get down to the area where the bridge winds up being. So you can see as I went along, we zoom way in from the house, I've been trying to cross as few of these sort of bright lines where the altitude changes as possible. And I've been sort of wandering around the sides of the big changes in the terrain in order to avoid that. And this winds up being like the steepest decline, but it's doing it at a place where all of the gradations are moving north to south. And so having an east to west road very cleanly cuts its way down through that altitude, all the way down to meeting up to this point here. So before I get attacked on my own front doorstep, let's take a nap. And yeah, let's take a little flight up above to a little bit off to the side so we can get a better sense of how the road moves in 3 dimensions. So here I'm going down with the hillside a bit, and that would have gone way down into this area where I didn't want to be. So I put in a little bit of an embankment. I might have been able to turn this road a bit earlier and avoid it, but that's all right. But you can see clearly where there's sort of an unnatural shape that I obviously put in. That comes around to here, comes back, goes through that grove of trees down there. And now looking at it in 3D, you can see that's really quite an elevation change. There's quite a cliff there. And even this hill here is a decently tall hill that would have been not good to try and go straight over. So instead, we kind of duck around behind the trees in that little grove there. And then this is where the terrain changes to being, well, I wouldn't say flat by any means, but at least not quite as steep as up here and not quite as steep as down there. So I kind of did a little scouting around and found where is the least steep section of cutting across this hill, but it's still cutting across. And you can really clearly see how this grade changes, right? It goes to this 2-to-1 grade right next to the path, where it's generally not that steep in the rest of it, which is fine. I think that's kind of an interesting effect, really. And then here's that section where it starts diving down again, but too early, and it's going to lead me into the water where I don't want to be quite yet. So I bring the road around and have it cut through back into the trees a ways, and then follows this nice smooth slope. And you can kind of see in the distance here how the whole thing just kind of gradually comes down to the lake, and has it come around to meet up with this point here. Now eventually this road is going to go across, and you can see this is the narrowest little gap. I'm going to make a bridge that's high enough that you can get ships on both sides here, because this is a big enough area where we do want to be able to get boats back there. So a little bridge to come across here, but high enough that regular boats can get through. And then this is going to be an interesting problem, because we go to a pretty steep cliff right about here, and there's just no reasonable way to get up there. So what I'm kind of thinking at the moment is I need to meet up with this road, but I don't necessarily need to do it completely above ground. So maybe what I'll do is extend this a little ways, and then somewhat before I get to the edge of the cliff, dive in and make a tunnel that's going to go down and get me to the elevation roughly down here-ish, so that right about where the hill starts getting steep, right about down there maybe, I'll have the tunnel come out, so that there's a bit of a stretch there that goes down into the ground, basically from up here, diving into a tunnel, going under the cliff and then coming out about here, and then have the road follow its way back down to this point where the bridge will begin, and then leap over to the other side. So I'm going to go get to work on some of those things, and I will be back with you momentarily. Okay, back again. I am now standing on the opposite bank from where I started. That is the little swampy area where I began this video. So I have continued the road from there over here. Obviously, I haven't made the bridge yet, but that's next. This road goes through this altogether too shaded swamp area and leads up into the hills a bit to get to that tunnel I was talking about. And as I trot along here, you can see the tunnel. I decided to use some of the kind of local materials here to produce the lighting and sides and textures. So there's a lot of basalt in these hills. So I decided to use that for the flooring, just raw basalt, and basalt bricks for the sides. And I decided to use these garden lanterns for lighting things. And those are produced by just taking some wrought iron fence with wrought iron ingots and combining them together. And then you need to right-click them, because they start out as just empty cages. So you right-click them with this candle that you can produce using wax from whatever different kind of mods you've got going on. The easy way to do it, at least for garden stuff, is to use this Candia stuff, which is a plant you find in warmer climates. So in here in the tunnel, I didn't want it to feel altogether too brightly lit up, so these candles produce a kind of dim sort of glow that I thought worked pretty well. Using the really dark texture also helped. As far as the floor is concerned, you can see I made it pretty much straight steps all the way up, where each step is 1 meter wide. Get up into the light, you can see a little bit better. So I've got basalt slabs, microblocks, and just regular basalt, so alternating each one makes the steps. And then the walls are just plain old basalt bricks. And that's it. That brings me back to my road between the village and my house. So I think I'm going to close off this video here with having made some fine progress on connecting my new house to my old house and everything else, but leaving this bridge for next time. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. If you want to learn when the next video comes out and find out about this bridge, go ahead and hit subscribe, and I will talk to you later.